Today, we are diving into an important conversation on sustainability, leadership, and the evolving role of operational excellence in the business. What do you consider the biggest strategic risk for senior leadership when scaling businesses in such diverse regions?
Single biggest risk, and I think I touched upon it briefly, is the having a mindset, a sort of an arrogant mindset that since we are a successful company operating in one part of the world, using a specific business philosophy, if as a business, as a company, you have a vision, you cannot deviate from that. What you have to do is you have to take all other factors into account and see how best that can.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to FaceTime with Leaders, powered by Directors Institute, World Council of Directors. I'm your host, Sunil Sharma. Today, we are diving into an important conversation on sustainability, leadership, and the evolving role of operational excellence in the business world. As global markets continue to shift, the intersection of leadership, P&L management, and business growth has never been more critical for the success of large-scale multinational corporations. Our guest today is someone who has driven these changes at the highest levels. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Sunil Sharma, Managing Director and founder of RHENIK Associates LLP. With over 30 years of experience in leadership and operations with major global MNCs, Mr. Sharma has successfully led multiple businesses, startups, managed P&L across continents, and made a significant impact in industries spanning manufacturing, technology, and more. Mr. Sharma, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you very much, Sunny, for having me on your platform. I really look forward to sharing my perspective with your viewers.
Likewise. So, Mr. Sharma, you have had such a diverse career from leading global businesses to starting new ventures across continents. But with all your experience, was there a specific moment or turning point when you realized the world of business was changing? Maybe it was a market shift, a new challenge, or an innovation that made you rethink the way you approached your work. What was that moment for you? And how did it shape your strategy going forward?
But Sunny, the world of business is always changing and evolving. And a realization that I had very early in my career was that really there are two kinds of businesses. The first one's it's pretty much like Apple. They're the ones who tell the customers what they should be using. They're the ones who set the trends. And the rest of them are merely responding to the trends which are there in the marketplace. So when I think about my career as a young engineer, when I started working for Alcoa CSI in the US, and that was within the packaging market, I started interacting with customers. And one of the things which kind of hit me was that there are a lot of unmet customer needs which are not being addressed at all. And very few people in the industry are actually thinking outside the box to completely redefine the product. Neither us nor our competitors actually had a defined process to understand those needs and develop solutions. We didn't have any cross-functional teams which were challenging the status quo and thinking of disruptive ways of or disruptive product ideas. Most of the new products which are being developed were either addressing a problem which the customer had raised, or they were being followed because it was the pet project of someone who was fairly high up in the food chain in the business, and it was difficult to say no to them. Again, my very first role in this business, I started working on solving customer complaints. We had a huge issue with customer complaints. And my manufacturing director at that time, since I was new to the business, asked me to take a look at those and see how we could kind of reduce those. We set up a fairly aggressive target. We wanted to reduce customer complaints almost 50% year by year. So what we did is we formed a cross-functional team. We took a whole bunch of people who were process experts, who knew everything which was there to be known about processes. And then the second thing was, second part of the team was new people like me who knew very little about it, but who were constantly asking why and how. And that allowed us to get to the root cause of many issues. This basically this initiative led to a particular point where we were able to solve 50% of the issues to root, and then we had a pretty good process in place which allowed us to move forward. This role also kind of helped me move on to the very next level within the organization. I was very lucky to have good mentors in the business, and a senior vice president in the area of global business development ended up picking me out to help on the technical side when it came to global expansion. And this is where I would say sort of the rubber kind of met the road. And in this particular role, I started traveling around the world, meeting customers, understanding their needs. I started going to meeting government officials as we started evaluating expansion. I started negotiating on behalf of the company. So all of these things kind of came together, and once again, being at the right place at the right time is a huge thing in the corporate world. I became the youngest GM in the history of the company within a few years. And some of the key learnings that I had from all of this was that you have to understand various perspectives, especially as you try to go global. It's really, really important to understand pretty much everyone's perspective. So the key skill which I really picked up on during this was listening. Listening is one of the most important things. Most times when you're having a conversation, you're actually already formulating a response, even before the person opposite you stops speaking. So once you listen completely, you fully understand what the issue is, and you're able to respond. Being sensitive to cultural differences was huge, especially as you're trying to go global. This is something which is extremely useful. And then last but not least is what is completely sacrosanct is your vision. If as a business, as a company, you have a vision, you cannot deviate from that. What you have to do is you have to take all other factors into account and see how best that can fit within your vision. And then considering all the stakeholders, whether it's the shareholders, the employees, the vendors, and the communities that we operate in, what is the best way to take things forward. So this is probably these are the kind of learnings that I had very early, and so also some of the trigger points which got me thinking very early in my career.
Mr. Sharma, thank you for the excellent start to this conversation. And talking about the turning points in your journey really shows how deep experience shapes the way leaders lead change and respond to clarity. Uh, Mr. Sharma, your career spans over 30 years, managing large scale operations across continents and industries. From turning around businesses to launching new ventures, you have seen it all. Over the years, you have launched and led businesses across different continents and industries, from Alco to Midal Group. From a boardroom perspective, what's the critical decision making process when entering new markets or launching new ventures? And what factors do leaders need to consider to ensure the right balance between global vision and local adaptation?
Right. So here, Sunny, we'll talk about a couple of examples. The first one is when a company is considering a greenfield or a brownfield expansion into new geographic territories. I'll use Alcoa CSI's example over here. And the second one, I'll reference Midal, the Midal Group or Midal Cables, where we'll talk a little bit about the adjacencies which exist. So you're already in a business. What are the other things that you can do without significantly adding capex and resources and still succeed? So now coming back to the factors that you were asking about. So one of the first thing is market signal, right? This is absolutely key. You have to be in tune with what your customers are telling you. How fast are they growing? Which product or market segment seems to be on a growth trajectory within their portfolio? Competitive intelligence is another one, which is very, very important. You have to know what your competitors are working on. Are they already present in the territories that you intend to enter? or are they looking to enter or sort of follow suit if you were to go in there? The third one, which is very important, is the legal and the regulatory framework. How often are the laws of that country or the regulations in the country changing? Are they actually changing for the better, or are they becoming more and more restrictive? This is extremely important. Then the long-term value potential. If you make a commitment by going to a new territory or a new geography, it's not just the first move that counts. You really need to be thinking about what happens after 3, 5, 7, or 10 years. And so, what's the long term value potential of actually setting up a manufacturing operation or a call center or any other kind of a service industry in a new territory? Now, going back to the CSI or the Alcoa CSI example of entering new markets, one of the things which is extremely important over here is that you cannot adopt what in the business we call a cookie cutter approach. So basically, just because something is working very well in one particular region doesn't mean it will work the same in the other. It might, but there's a possibility it might not. So while your overall strategy is what I call sacrosanct, the way you go about implementing it must take into account things like your local cultural norms, reliability of your local supply chain partners, availability of local talent, their ability to execute. What are the expectations of the local customers? Even if the local customers are a division of a global customer, like a Coke or a Pepsi, sometimes the local customers have their own, product range and their own requirements, which are slightly different. So when you're executing a global strategy, it is extremely important that you have the ability to manage local constraints. If you this is the difference typically between success and failure. uh, you need to do your due diligence, you need to collect a lot of data, you need to evaluate that data, and then you need to set realistic goals and timelines. And then there needs to be perfect alignment between the senior leadership in your organization and the project level teams. Because sometimes what happens is that while you may have actually won the battle, just because of unrealistic expectations which were set up at the beginning, a win might seem like a failure. So these are some of the factors that you have to take into account. Now, out of the two examples that I talked about, I'll talk about the example of Midal cables. Now, Midal cables, pretty huge business, primarily in the business of aluminium rods, manufacturing aluminium rods, wires, and conductors, what we call in the business bare overhead conductors for high voltage transmission. If you think about this industry, electrical transmission and distribution industry, what happens is you have a model, which is the existing model, where you have power generation plants. These plants are typically hydroelectric, thermal, or nuclear. Massive operations. They require a lot of upfront capital, and because of the safety risks which are typically associated and the kind of space which is required, they're never closer to the consumer. They're in some remote area, in some place, and then what you do is you generate the power over there, you transmit it using very high voltage conductors onto a substation, you step it down, then you distribute it to the consumer. Um, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020, we were faced with a situation where, like everybody else in the world, where the supply chains were restricted. And we started thinking about, we had some time, the board had some time to actually start thinking about what is it that can be done next. So we thought about the model that instead of remote generation and then transmission and distribution over long distances to the consumer, why don't we try and come up with a model where we generate and consume at the same point, which is what, if you think about a typical solar plant is. Now, there's really nothing new about the solar plant. It's been around for quite some time. But what really got us thinking about it was that for the first time, the cost and efficiencies of the solar panels or the photovoltaic cells had reached a point where the paybacks were becoming attractive. So from 12 to 13-year paybacks, we were talking about paybacks of about 6 to 8 years. depending upon the size of the plant. And the other huge advantage that we actually had by trying to move to solar was, like I said, the upfront capital requirement is actually relatively low. If you think about the fact that there are no moving parts in a solar plant, compare that to a nuclear or a thermal or a hydroelectric plant where there are so many moving parts in the form of turbines and boilers and so on and so forth. Um, the operational cost is very, very low. Also, there's a huge advantage when it comes to the quality of power. Now, if you're in the developed world, if you're in Western Europe, you're in the United States, where there are no power failures, it's not a big deal. But if you're a truly global company, you will be located in developing markets, or either you are or you're going to soon be in that area. And power failures are a huge issue that you need to be overcoming. So this gave us an option of presenting solutions which provided us good quality power, continuous power without any failure, at a price point which was going to remain stable over the life of the solar plant, which is 25 years. So all of these advantages, when you roll these back and you calculate the ROI or the payback of the project at that particular point, you find that suddenly it looks very attractive. And because of the COVID pandemic, we had some spare time on our hands. So we put together a small team. I led that business for the Midal Group. And we started with internal operations. We had about 10 to 12 manufacturing plants of our own. So we started with a 250 kilowatt, relatively smaller operation, moved on to a 4 megawatt, and went about adding solar capacity into most of our operations. Once we had gained some expertise, we then took it to external customers, whether they were commercial or industrial. We stayed away from residential because that market was already too crowded. And really, it was very small for a company like Midal to be getting into. And all of these things, once we started rolling all of this out, there was huge advantages for the business as such. We were suddenly being seen as an environmentally conscious or a responsible vendor. We had lowered our overall cost of operations. Being seen as an environmentally conscious or a responsible vendor gave us a competitive advantage. Our customers for that particular industry would give you a little bit of a premium on your price if you were ticking a few boxes on the ESG front. We were earning carbon credits, which could be monetized at some point of time in the future. So all of these things basically created a win-win situation for the company. What we're talking about here is, now going back to this Alcoa CSI model, where let's say we were very strong in one part of the world, which is United States, and we wanted to go global. So what's the best way of trying to achieve that? So there's a term called localization. So where you have to basically, where you're a global company, but you want to operate locally within a smaller country or a region. One of the best ways of doing this is to make sure that you, again, as I mentioned earlier, your strategy has to be handled centrally. But the execution of that strategy, things like basically marketing, sales, and operational decisions, those need to be made locally. But other things like your brand identity, you cannot change that. You cannot change the core technology that you're using for manufacturing. As I said, the strategic vision must remain pretty much untouched. It's just the interpretation of that which continues to change as you go about. There's a very interesting term called build guardrails and not handcuffs. So when you're trying to localize, when a global company is trying to come to a smaller place, smaller country, and trying to set up businesses there, they cannot be overly restrictive. They just need to provide guidelines to ensure that people do not deviate left or right from there. But you cannot be handcuffing your local workforce. Otherwise, there's a lot of frustration that kind of builds in. You have to standardize things like back-end operations. You have to, your IT systems, your ERP systems, you cannot allow that to change from location to location. Your CRM systems, same thing. Because all of this intelligence, for the lack of a better word, or data, needs to go back at a headquarter level, which allows better decision making. At the end of the day, one other factor which becomes extremely important here is normally in a situation like this, the assumption is that the data transfer is happening sort of from the headquarters or the mother plant direct to the local location. But in my experience, there's a lot of value when you go to a new location, you start up a business over there, and you're pretty much doing the same thing that you were doing in your HQ or at the mother plant. The new employees who are there, they bring an insight into that process. And sometimes they make suggestions which help you improve not only that location's results, but also global. So you need to have some kind of a framework of making sure that you can backward cascade this knowledge into your organization, and then sort of as lean manufacturing principles suggest, copy shamelessly and get the true benefit of that moving forward. So these are all the factors which come into account.
That was incredibly insightful, Mr. Sharma. Now, as we all know, scaling a business across multiple regions comes with its own challenges, particularly around operations, profitability, and maintaining a consistent growth trajectory. Having been at the helm of large, complex operations from Europe to Africa, what do you consider the biggest strategic risk for senior leadership when scaling businesses in such diverse regions? And how do you manage these risks while ensuring sustainability and profitability remain aligned with the long term vision of the company?
So Sunny, here I think the single biggest risk, and I think I touched upon it briefly, is the having a mindset or sort of an arrogant mindset that since we are a successful company operating in one part of the world, using a specific business philosophy, we can pretty much use the same thing to succeed in another geography. Some examples, and these examples are more towards the M&A side, the merger and acquisition side, which have failed with this kind of a mindset is you think about Chrysler and Mercedes-Benz way back in 1998. It was considered to be the mother of all mergers in terms of the capabilities of the two automotive companies coming together. They failed miserably. I'll not go into specific reasons now because of the time constraints. AOL and Time Warner, America Online at that point of time was probably one of the most successful internet service provider, and Time Warner was a huge entertainment company. The synergies were massive. If these two companies would have come together and succeeded, they would have achieved great heights. But they didn't. The working styles were very, very different. So now, coming back again to sort of a more manufacturing-based example, if you think about when you're trying to scale globally, it's all about managing variables. And when you are trying to go to a new location, new country, new geography, there are three basic variables that you need to take into account and keep a very close eye on. Their basically, your manpower that you have, your machinery, which is going to be manufacturing your product, and the materials that you're actually going to be using in this or the supply chain. So to adequately cover these risks, one of the first things that you need to be doing is you need to have a very clear organizational chart with all the roles clearly defined. And then you got to go to the next level and say for every single role that which is listed over there, what are the skill sets which is going to make an employee successful in this particular role? What this does is, as early as employee selection, employee interview, as you're evaluating the pool of candidates who are there, and very rarely does it happen that a candidate is sort of 100% fit into a role. You typically end up finding people between the range of 60 to 80%. So there's always a gap. But while you're interviewing them, while you're evaluating them, this inventory of skill sets allows you to do a gap analysis. And very early in their training program, in addition to the generic training which has been prepared by, let's say, someone else in the team, you can start focusing specifically on the gaps that exist with that particular employee. So your employee starts performing a lot earlier than what would be in a typical case. The second important part about manpower is you have to have what I call an onboarding team. This onboarding team has to be, or a hand-holding team, for the lack of a better word, this has to be a group of very experienced employees who know everything about that particular process. They need to spend anywhere between 90 to 180 days at the new location, pretty much doing that, training and hand-holding the new employees. And then last but not the least, yes, you've trained them, yes, you've stayed with them. How do you know when it's time to let go? So there needs to be an evaluation methodology which is fairly robust. So you know when it's a good time to let go. So once you've taken care of the manpower, now comes the second important part, which is often overlooked in the business, which is the machinery. What usually happens is that as you start evaluating your plans to add another location, you start scrounging for any machines which are kind of unused and lying around. That's a huge mistake businesses make because they just want to utilize the excess capacity which is taking around. Your machinery, your process machinery is one of the single most important variable. If it is not reliable, if it has not been tested prior to shipping, what happens is when you move it to the new location and you commission it, you end up creating a situation where you're not using, remember, your new employees, you might be in a situation where you're not producing the product to the customer specifications. And most of the times, there's a lot of finger pointing which goes on. I mean, your maintenance team might tell you it's the workers who don't know what they're doing, and your people who are managing your workers will say, well, the machines are no good, so we don't know what we need to do about it. I've seen people lose months in this process, just finger pointing and not really knowing what to do. Now, if you control that variable, if your machinery, is something which has been previously tested, it has produced good product, then that's a variable that you can rule out and you can really start focusing on what is the root cause of the issue itself. Last but not the least is the materials. You might want to move from a country like US to India, let's say, and say, hey, look, the same materials that we buy in the US are available in the in India for 50% of the cost that we incur in the United States. Sounds really attractive, but don't make the mistake of localizing materials at the time of startup. At the time of startup, what's most important is that you quickly get a stable process in place where you're producing customer approved products and you begin shipping. Once you have done that using approved vendors who are already supplying other global locations, then you begin this exercise. Typically, this begins, I would say, between 6 to 18 months, let's say 6 months after startup to 18 months, depending upon how complicated the startup is. That's when you slowly begin the localization of raw materials. So what this approach does is it ensures that all the stakeholders are satisfied. As I said, the customers get the same quality that they're used to in other parts of the world. Your employees are now more confident about their own abilities. They're not doubting themselves. And all the stakeholders, senior management, your shareholders, your board of directors, they start seeing the desired financial results along the expected timeline. That makes it easier when you're going for an expansion a couple of years down the line. When you go back to them and you ask for more funds, it makes your life a lot easier. So these are the various things that you need to take into consideration.
Absolutely, Mr. Sharma. That perspective really brings out how leaders view strategic risk when they are responsible for long-term multi-region growth. So thank you for sharing that with us. Moving ahead, Mr. Sharma, in your roles across multiple global organizations, especially with your involvement in Midal Group, how do you embed sustainability into the very fabric of business strategy? How can senior leaders ensure that sustainability goals aren't just talked about in the boardroom, but are actively driving decision making, operational strategies, and market growth?
Yeah, this is a tough one, Sunny. Sustainability really needs to be a key part of your strategy. It cannot be sort of an standalone thing. And you've got to integrate it, like you said, into the business strategy. And the way you do this is you have to move away from the mindset where it's just a voluntary, siloed, or sort of a standalone initiative that you're trying to implement. Uh, and you really start taking all the ESG factors and integrating them into your business planning uh, and your operations. Now, there's several ways of doing this. One of the most effective ways of trying to get this done, in my experience and opinion, is you make sure that everybody in the organization, their annual salary increases and their bonuses are linked to sustainability objectives, not just financial results. So we did this in Alcoa, where irrespective of whether I was a production supervisor on the shop floor or I was the CEO of the business, in addition to financial goals, we had environmental health and safety goals that all of us had to hit. And if the location of the business missed that particular goal, everyone in that location, their bonuses were impacted. So it wasn't just one person's or one department's responsibility. It was a collective responsibility. So what this did is that the senior leaders spoke about it every opportunity they got. They reinforced the message. Um, we started setting up what is called in the industry as smart goals, right? I mean, your goals have to be something which is specific, measurable, and so on. At the same time, they have to be a stretch goal. They cannot be something which is very, very easily achievable. I'll give you an example here again from Alcoa. Alcoa was a massive business, 120,000 employees around the world. $30 billion in revenue. At that time, the world's largest aluminum company. They did everything from mining bauxite to refining to smelting to the point where then they started rolling out the finished goods, which were being used by industrial customers and consumers. It was a huge challenge to set up a goal like zero lost work days. So what lost work day is it's a goal where it says that anywhere in the business, if there is an injury which results in an employee going home for the period of their scheduled work shift, then that's considered to be a lost work day. So our CEO came out and said, hey, we want to aspire to be a company which has zero lost work days all over the world. How are we going to go and get this done? And they started putting together their heads. They got some teams together. It wasn't easy. We didn't hit it for the first 10 years. After that, we finally got to a point where we hit that for the first time. So this was massive. You have your goal sometimes has to be sort of like a North Star. It has to provide a direction. You may never get there in some of the instances, but you cannot take that away. Because if you aim for zero, you'll be able to reduce the amount of injuries that you actually have. Sometimes fatalities. A lot of people die in these kind of operations when there are accidents, and it's extremely important to be able to control that. One of the other things that I'll talk about is when you talk about metrics, there are what we call lagging metrics and leading metrics. So an example of, again, I'll use safety as an example. So lost work days, total recordable rate, all injury rate. These are all lagging metrics. By the time you see these numbers, the injury has already happened. What are you going to do to try and make sure that the injuries do not happen? Because that's your ultimate goal, right? So you've got to think of some leading metrics. Think about any accident that happens. It does not happen, sort of spontaneously. There are enough near misses which happen, which eventually result in an accident happening. So what that means is that if you had identified the issue at the stage of a near miss, where the incident or the accident actually had not happened, but had almost happened, and you had implemented a solution for it at that particular stage, then you would not be sitting here worrying about how you have lost the life of an employee in your team. So we started focusing on leading metrics. We said, okay, let's talk about the number of incidents which are being reported. The more the number of incidents which are being reported, we are solving them significantly earlier than when they can actually cause injuries, right? Because this will have a whole bunch of near misses also. What are the other things which are important in this case? The awareness of the employee. So you start training them more. You make sure that the number of training hours per employee is being tracked, and that's what helps you get to the next thing. One other key thing I'll talk about here, again, this topic is really wide, but one more thing which is very handy is celebrating wins. What most people do is they have one event at the end of the year where they might recognize a few people for doing things right. Doesn't work that way. You want your employees engaged. You got to have weekly meetings where you are highlighting things which have been done at an extremely low level. Doesn't matter, but you got to take that person who submitted one good idea, which potentially saved an injury down the line. You got to make sure they stand up in front of the people in a toolbox meeting, talk about that. This is something like this works like magic. When you see one of your co-workers standing up there and talking, you want to do that the following week. So you start thinking about what are the things out there which will help me get to that point. And once this kind of a culture develops in the organization, there's really no end. I mean, you continue improving. Going back to the lean manufacturing principles of continuous improvement. This is how you make it happen.
That was a clear, practical view of how sustainability moves from strategy to action. It's insightful to see how real leaders ensure it drives decisions and long-term value, not just boardroom conversations. Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Sharma. Uh, all right, so now we are going to switch gears a little and have a bit of fun with our quick fire round. And I will ask you a series of rapid fire questions, and you can answer with just a quick yes, no, or a brief response. Are you ready for it?
Yep. Let's go.
So here's my first question to you. Do you believe that renewable energy will dominate global power sources in the next decade?
Absolutely. We are sitting on a finite energy resource in the form of crude oil today, which is not regenerating itself. And it's being consumed at an alarming rate globally. So, really, there's no other option for us but to go the renewable route.
Okay. Next one. Is there such a thing as too much focus on ESG in business?
No. Once again, in my experience, every ESG initiative that you actually implement, it offers you a competitive advantage. The real challenge here is that how do you, as a business leader or a board of a company, leverage or monetize the integration of these ESG initiatives to improve your business results?
Okay. Can technology alone solve the operational challenges of large scale industries?
Yeah, that's a tough one again. But my response would be no. Technology is an enabler. What it does, and it's non-negotiable, by the way. You can never stop working on looking for tech-based solutions. But by itself, it cannot achieve anything. For you to be able to successfully roll it out, you need human resources. You need favorable regulatory environment. Sometimes you develop this great technology, but the regulatory environment in the country or the region may not allow you to implement that. And then last but not the least, you actually need capital. So yeah, once you have all of these, then you can move forward. But by itself, it will not solve all the operational challenges.
Great. Next one. Will policy changes drive faster innovation than technological advancements in the energy sector?
Once again, no. If you take a historical perspective here, what you will find that policy changes have always lagged innovation. Very few political leaders or governments around the world actually have the necessary vision to reverse this. The policies are always being formed once a solution already exists. There have been a few exceptions, but by and large, I would say no.
Okay, great. Do you think global cooperation is sufficient to meet climate goals?
It's essential, but it's not sufficient to basically meet all the climate goals. We've seen enough times situations where you have these massive global meetings where people agree on what we're going to do by 2030 or 2050, and then the political leaders come back and they come to their home countries, and then the real sort of the reality hits them in the face. Whether it's the structure of the government or the regulations which exist, there's a lot to be done. So while the cooperation by itself is essential, what's really needed is strong action at the national level. What's also needed is the rapid technological innovation. Once again, you may adopt a solution which someone else has picked up, but again, there's more than one way of getting to the goal. So you may, if you have a very strong technical mindset within your particular country or region, you may be able to find a better way of doing it. And then last but not the least, financial commitments. For sure, that's also needed in addition to global cooperation.
Incredible. All right. So last one before we wrap up the quick fire round. If you could change one thing about the renewable energy sector today, what would it be?
It would most certainly be the availability of capital on favorable terms. So, despite the fact that the capital intensity per kilowatt hour generated, let's say, has dropped steadily over the last decade or so, and will continue to drop, but capital is always scarce when it comes to businesses. And whatever capital is required to switch to renewable energy, right, it is still relatively high. And as a business leader, you have to balance everything which is on your plate. So, in a scenario where, let's say, the government was giving away interest-free loans, which is unlikely in the capitalist world, but let's say interest loans at a very favorable rate of 1% or so. Only in that kind of a situation, I do believe that the businesses will be able to move forward and make the switch to renewable. Until that happens, I think they will continue to divert the sort of the limited capital they have towards more urgent requirements they have towards the business.
Okay. So that was all for the quick fire. Mr. Sharma, given your extensive experience leading businesses across manufacturing, renewable energy, and global operations, here's a scenario that touches on a potential governance failure. Now imagine you are overseeing a large scale renewable energy project, and midway through, it's discovered that safety protocols were not followed in the procurement process for critical equipments. This oversight could potentially endanger both the project timeline and employee safety. Now, as a leader, how would you address this governance failure, ensure immediate corrective actions, and prevent similar issues from affecting the company's global operations in the future?
Yeah, this is it's a serious lapse. The way you've described the scenario, it's a pretty serious lapse, and it definitely has safety implications. It is likely to impact your company's reputation down the line, but it also has legal implications. And it should be addressed immediately. You may have certain project managers who might want to sweep this under the rug and try to move on, thinking that maybe this is not my problem and someone else down the line is going to have to take care of it. But in my experience and opinion, full transparency and disclosure is required in such a case. You need to immediately let your senior leadership know what's happened. You need to let them know that there's going to be a potential delay and potentially also cost escalation. But there is really no other option but to conduct a full-fledged safety review. Otherwise, if we have a serious accident down the line, it's going to hurt the company. And then you need to let them know that by what time you're going to come back to them with a specific plan. Because the first communication is all about informing them about what's happened and that, yes, we are on top of it and we are working on a solution. Now, as soon as that communication happens, the next thing you need to do is sit with your procurement leadership and talk to the highest level that you can with your vendor in terms of the leadership of your vendor. You need to put all the cards on the table. You need to, because without their cooperation, you're not going to be able to move forward, right? The goods are already delivered in this case, I'm assuming, and they're sitting on your docks. And pretty much half of it or all of the payment has already been made. So you do not have the time to go find another vendor and try and buy the same thing. And once you work with these people, you need to let them know that they need to assign a sort of a high level team, which is going to give it the desired priority. A full blown safety evaluation needs to take place over there. They need to provide you all the data based on actual testing. Now, if it's a vendor who's let's say if it's an approved vendor who has worked with you in other parts of the world, and it's an equipment which you have used in other parts of the world, chances are they pretty much have 80 to 90% of that information already present because you have implemented it elsewhere. But despite that, you need to do the whole thing again. You need to go through the checklist, and you need to get a non-negotiable timeline from them by which they'll be able to come back to you with a firm recommendation of what are the additional risks for using this equipment at this location. Uh, One more thing which often gets overlooked is that if you look at your overall project timeline, or a Gantt chart, for the lack of a better word, and every step or every line item on that Gantt chart has what we call dependencies. So this can happen, and only when this step happens can you move on to the next step. If this doesn't happen, it delays pretty much quite a few things down the line. So you have to look at your Gantt chart. You have to identify what are the other impacts other than the fact that the installation of this equipment is going to get delayed. What are the other impacts to the overall project timeline, whether it's cost or time? Uh, Once you have done this, then you need to go back. You need to circle back with your senior management and make sure that they're fully aware of the cost implications, the time implications, and also let them know that yes, you have completed what the missing step was, and at least that risk is now taken care of. Now, how do you make sure this doesn't happen? It's really a systemic control that you need to put in place. Most organizations will have someone who's in charge of environmental health and safety, whether it be a manager or a team. And you simply need to add to your procurement protocol a step where any capex item needs to go through a full-blown safety evaluation prior to the request for funds being sent to the CEO or to the board of directors. So if the CEO does not see sign off by the safety manager, the procurement manager in that particular case, or anybody who's part of the team, they cannot cut a purchase order to the vendor. So this makes sure that you do not repeat this mistake. By doing these kind of by implementing these kind of measures, what you end up doing is you avoid surprises in your operations, and also from a cost perspective in terms of overall project management. And these measures also protect what we call the long-term value. They give you the operational continuity and also increase the stakeholder confidence. Once again, knowing that your capital requests or your project requests are not going to be a one-time thing. You repeatedly keep going back to the same group of people. And if they have confidence in what you have achieved in one of the projects, then they will, when you go back to them again, they will give you preference at that point of time, or they will listen to you with an open mind. So this is how I would handle this situation.
Incredible. That approach really shows how leaders turn a governance lapse into a structured, corrective, and preventive process. It gives listeners a clear view of how accountability and foresight work together in complex operations. Thank you for sharing that insight with us, Mr. Sharma. So, before we wrap up, let me ask you, Mr. Sharma, you are currently pursuing a certification in international corporate directorship through Directors Institute. How has joining Directors Institute influenced your approach to governance and decision making, particularly when overseeing complex projects across multiple regions?
Well, I'll spend a minute here, Sunny, first talking about how I narrowed down on Directors Institute. So, after about working in the corporate world for about 30 plus years, I decided to take a break way back at the sort of towards the beginning of 2023. And then as I relocated back to India and started looking at the scenario over here, I realized I should be able to help a lot of boards by sharing my perspective with them. But then I quickly realized that while I might have a lot of experience, what I do not have is validation in the form of a certification. So I looked at the options in the market, and I found that Directors Institute actually was the best suited for me personally, for the reason that it was very comprehensive. It offered multiple certifications. I think up to 5 certifications are being offered under this program. It was flexible. I was very particular about the fact that I cannot attend formal classes either in person or even virtually. I have to do this on my own time. So it was giving me that option. It was really well recognized by the industry. There's a lot of people who are hiring from their pool, and it had struck some pretty good strategic partnerships with Wolf University and other places like the University of Oxford. So, having said this, this is how I kind of picked up the DI program, and I found it to be very useful so far. And what I really find is that for a board to succeed in ensuring whether it's governance rigor or the fiduciary responsibility or improving the board level judgment, there are a few things you need to have in place. There's a very clear reporting protocol you need to establish. You need to know, you need to establish the formats, the frequency, and these meetings have to be non-negotiable. You need to make sure that they happen with a lot of rigor. Clear decision-making frameworks are extremely important. Again, if you think about this from a perspective of projects, the project teams really need to know who's responsible for what decisions. So they're not wasting the time of the senior most executive in the organizations with minor things. If you don't have this framework established, you waste a lot of time, kind of sort of becoming redundant. Accountability checks. Once you have these two things in place, you need to keep an eye on what's really going on. So at the highest level, while it's difficult for the entire board to be involved, one of the directors can be involved, the CEO, the CFO of the business. They can make surprise visits to the project sites, to the operational sites. They can sit in as observers in some of the meetings and see what's going on. And the important thing here is if they find that something's not going as per their expectations, they have that corrected at that stage, not 3 months later when the management's making a presentation to the board. It's too late. By that time, the risk is already sort of amplified. And last but not the least is again escalation protocols. Like I said, who does the project team go to for what specific issue? And once they have escalated, this is where most people stop, is they might say that I have an escalation matrix established. But what about a help chain? So for which issue do you go to whom? And if that person does not respond within a specified amount of time, who's the next person you need to be able to escalate to? That's how you become effective. Even as a manager or as a project manager, if I'm on the shop floor or if I'm at the project site and I know I have not responded to something which has been escalated to me, I have another 12 hours to do it, or it's going to go to my boss. So I'm going to stay on top of things. So these are the key learnings, which in my opinion have influenced my approach to decision making while sort of overseeing projects.
Sharma, that perspective clearly shows how advanced governance training translates into actionable board level thinking across complex multi region projects. Let me tell you, Mr. Sharma, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. Your insights into global leadership, scaling businesses, and integrating sustainability into business strategy have been incredibly valuable. Uh, as we wrap up your journey from overseeing multi-billion dollar businesses to shaping the future of renewable energy, highlights the power of visionary leadership and accountability in today's fast evolving global landscape. So, thank you so much for joining us.
But thank you very much, Sunny. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I hope this helps the viewers in some way. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you once again, Mr. Sharma. And to our listeners, whether you are a seasoned executive or just starting your leadership journey, today's conversation is a reminder that effective leadership is not just about making decisions, but about shaping a lasting ethical impact. Thank you for tuning in to FaceTime with Leaders, powered by Directors Institute, World Council of Directors. I'm your host, Sunil Pancholi, and we look forward to seeing you next time with more inspiring conversations from the world's leading experts. Until then, stay ahead, stay responsible, and keep leading with purpose. Thank you so much.